All right, we're looking at a 2011 Chevrolet Cruze with the 1.8 in it. This actually started out as a mobile call, and I ended up bringing it back to the shop because it needed more than what I wanted to do on the side of the street, especially with the snow and everything. The original complaint was she didn't have heat, and I asked her if she had checked the coolant level, and she said yes, it's full. So I took her by her word, and ended up. I was at that point thinking, well, maybe it's got a blend door issue or something behind the dash. So I went there with my scan tool. Was all set to scan it for code, or scan the blend door, see if I can get them to actuate, stuff like that. And first thing I did when I got there is check the coolant anyway. That's always the first thing I do whenever someone says they don't have heat. And lo and behold, it was low or almost out on the reservoir. So I'm not sure what she checked. She's not a mechanic, obviously, so I don't blame her. But whatever she checked wasn't the coolant, or, well, it had to be what it was. Because anyway, I went and got some coolant, put it in there, dug it out about 8 inches of snow, and took it for a little ride. Sure enough, it's got heat, real good heat. Once that coolant reservoir is full. And I noticed that the water pump had been weeping a little bit around the gasket, actually, not the whole weep hole, but the actual gasket. It had filled up with a little bit of coolant there. And by the time I got it back to the garage here, it had used a pretty decent amount of coolant out of the reservoir, and it burned off the coolant that was piling up by the water pump. But it's definitely the water pump causing the issue. You can tell by looking at it, it's been leaking for a while. So we're going to go ahead and do that. It's not a real hard job on these, I don't believe. I actually don't see too many of these Cruzes lately, so I'm not real up on them like I am some of the other cars. But it appears this one's pretty easy. I just did a timing belt on one of these cars, very similar. And the water pump is not hooked to your timing belt on these, so it's actually a pretty straightforward job, I believe. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on it, get you over there. We'll take a look at it and go from there. Alright, the first thing I do on a water pump job, usually like this, is I go ahead and tack down the seal on the water pump. That way it's dry by the time I get ready to go to reinstall this. I don't want to have that seal falling off. And you don't need to use RTV or anything like that. I just use Permatex. It's a high-tack glue. And all it does, I just put a little light coat. That's that red stuff you see. I just put a little light coat around the channel there, and then put the seal. Whatever water pump I'm working on, I put the seal in there, and that'll hold that. So when I'm going to put the water pump on, it's not falling off or whatever. So it's not a big deal to use a little bit of glue to glue it down. Just don't go crazy on it, and don't use RTV or anything like that. That's kind of a waste, and sometimes it can be a hindrance. These seals are made to seal without anything on them. So the only reason why I put anything on there is I don't want it falling off while I'm putting it on. And this is just a little high-tack glue. It's nothing else. So I usually do that first before I even start the job. That way when I'm ready to put that on, I don't have to worry about it. It's dry and it's ready to go. So that's pretty much what I do in all water pump jobs, no matter what car it is. And so that's just a little note or tip there. Now we'll go over to the car and start taking that thing apart and get it ready to put this on. Alright, so this may not be absolutely necessary for you. I'm going to go ahead and do it because I like to have room. And the water pump is down at an angle right by the frame here, where it'd be kind of hard to get the pulley off and stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off these 6 bolts here for the motor mount. I have a jack and a block under the oil pan to catch the motor. I'm going to jack it up a little bit. This may not be 100% necessary. If you don't have the means to jack the engine up, then don't worry about it, just deal with it. But since I can get this motor mount off in about a minute, if even, I'm going to go ahead and take the extra couple minutes to take it off and on, rather than, and then I'll have clear access to this stupid light. I'll have clear access to what I need to get to. So I'm going to go ahead, these are 15 millimeter. And I'm going the wrong way. So these motor mounts are pretty easy to get off. Like I said, I just did a timing belt on one of these. To me, it's not worth fighting all of this firewall or fender well here to, it's going to take less than a minute. You can see there the motor dropped a little bit, so I'll end up jacking it up a hair where I want it. And so here it is. Like I said, it may not be 100% necessary for you. I'm going to do it just because now I have clear access to everything. I'll jack the engine up a little bit, and I'll be able to just zip everything off and get down to it. So let me get set up. We'll pull that pulley off first after I jack this engine up a little bit, and we'll go from there. All right, so I'm trying to get you in there where I'm at. Before we take this drive belt off, it's a smart thing to go ahead and loosen these up. That way you got something to hold it while you're loosening it. So these are T47, so I'm gonna go ahead and break all those loose before we take this alternator belt off. That way it holds it for us, and we're not sitting there fighting that. So get yourself a Torx 47 and break all those loose, and then we'll go ahead and take this serpentine belt off, and then we'll go from there. All right, I'll show you what I did. Even with the engine jacked up, you can only really get to one bolt with a torque driver that size. So what I did is put a 15 millimeter and a long reach ratchet down in there. Your crankshaft bolt is a 15 millimeter. Just put a 15 mil socket on there and a long reach ratchet, and just crank the engine over to bring them to the top. So you're not putting much, this is a 4-cylinder. It doesn't have a ton of compression, or it's not real hard to pull over. So just rotate it over until each bolt comes up, knock them loose, and then once you get to that, we'll go ahead and get this tensioner loose. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up, and then we'll come back. All right, the tensioner bolt is, believe it or not, 13 millimeter. It's a little guy. So I just, to loosen it, you just put a 13 mil on there, and then push, leverage it back towards the firewall, towards the back of the car. And that will take the tension off the belt, and then you should have this right here. And I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of these two bolts here, and then we'll start taking this water pump off. So just a little FYI, it's a little small guy, 13 mil for your tensioner. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this pulley the rest of the way off, and then we'll start getting down to the water pump itself. All right, now we're down to the water pump. This is where it was puddling up the fluid, actually, which is kind of a weird spot for it to do that. But yeah, it was right up in here. The weep hole's right there, but I don't think it was coming from the weep hole. I think it was coming from the actual seal. Now you have to take the little bolts out all the way around, and these are those stupid inverted Torx bolts. It's actually an E10 socket. It looks like that, but if you have a 6.8 millimeter, I believe that's basically the same thing. If you don't have those E-sockets, normally you can find a regular socket, metric socket, to kind of substitute it, and I believe it's 8 on these 6-point. So if you don't, like I said, however you want, I don't know what GM was thinking using these, but whatever, it is what it is. But anyway, you got those, take those bolts off, and then it should come right off. Keep in mind that you're going to lose some coolant. I got a pan under there. We're not doing a coolant change on this one. She doesn't want that, so we're just going to catch whatever we lose out of here and then refill with new coolant whatever we lost. So you will need a pan, because when that comes off, it's going to make a nice little mess. All right, so this is what it should look like when you pull it off. You can see here there's a lot of corrosion on it, but I don't think it was coming out of the weep hole. It looks like it was just the seal itself was leaking. The seal itself is pretty smashed down. And when you get it off, you'll have that. Now you go ahead and clean that up. There shouldn't be a whole lot of cleanup, just a little bit, because all it is a rubber seal holding it on there. So go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, and then we'll go ahead and install the new one on there. And like I said, it's a pretty simple, straightforward job. The book calls for like 1.2 hours, something like that. So I think you can do it well under that. Of course, you're going to have to fill it with fluid and then test drive it and all that good stuff. So, I mean, it'll end up being an hour, hour and a half by the time you're done doing all that. But the actual job itself is pretty straightforward. Even with taking this motor mount off, which is not absolutely necessary, you know, with power tools, you're only adding a few minutes there. So, clean that up, and then we'll get right back on it, put the new one on. All right, so go ahead and put your water pump back on, start the 5 bolts, torque them down to 71 inch-pounds. That's inch-pound, not foot-pound, 71. So it's just a little bit over, you know, you don't go crazy tightening those. So anyway, 71 inch. So now we're at the point where we'll put the pulley back on, start those 3 bolts. The book says those bolts are 15 foot-pound, so they're not very tight either. That's basically a little bit over hand tight. So anyway, we'll stick that pulley back on and get those started. And this thing's almost wrapped up already. All right, now that's the pulley's back on, torqued, and I put the belt back on. Remember your tensioner right here is 13 mil. And if you forget how your belt goes, you can always Google, put in your car, and put, 2013 Chevy Cruze serpentine belt diagram on Google, and it'll pop up right away. One of the first images will be the routing for your serpentine. This one's pretty simple. Goes around the crank, the AC, comes up to the water pump, goes over to the alternator, and just kind of loops around the tensioner right here. So it's a pretty simple one. But if you forget, that's how it goes. And if that doesn't make sense to you, then go to Google, search on the image, and it'll pop up and you'll see it. So all we got left now is put this motor mount back in, air box, top it off. So I'll go ahead and put that motor mount back in, and we're almost done with this thing. All right, so we'll just set that motor mount back in here. Shouldn't hassle us too much. It's still jacked up. We didn't actually jack it up a whole lot. The motor mount's what you want to do if you do take this off, is just get all the bolts kind of started loosely, and don't tighten, just kind of tighten them loosely. And now this one's not sitting down all the way because it is jacked up a little, so I'll go ahead and let the jack down a little bit. It should straighten it out pretty decently. And like I said, we'll just this thing's hung up on something. We will just start everything kind of loose on it, and once everything's started, the bolts are straight, you can go ahead and run them down. The motor mounts are kind of, sometimes they don't want to start straight because everything's not lined up perfectly. You don't want to force anything, because then you'll end up cross-threading this aluminum, and that's no fun. And it's easy to do with these aluminum mounts. Everything's aluminum on this, so if everything's not kosher, when you go to run it down, you're going to end up snapping off or stripping out real easy. This one, they're all ran down pretty straight, so I'll go ahead and start it. See there, the engine moved up a little bit to meet it. Alright, so that's all back in. So all we got now is the air box. I'll go ahead and put that on real quick. And kind of close this out with some remaining thoughts, and all right, airbag's on. The job's pretty much done. One thing I will say is when you're filling the reservoir over there, go ahead and start the car after you fill it initially and turn the heat on full blast, and that'll help circulate the antifreeze towards your heater core and help burp out. I haven't had too many issues with burping these out on these Ecotechs, the 1.8s. They usually burp out pretty quick, or really nothing special you have to do to them that I've found. Like I said, I haven't worked on a ton of these, but I found as far as the cooling goes, there's no real special burping technique because the reservoir is pretty high over there. So go ahead and fill it up, turn the heat on, make sure it's full, take it for a drive, check it again, and you should be good to go. That's a water pump on a 1.8 2011 Chevy Cruze. Hope this video helps you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one, and may God bless you.